Hello, my friend. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Ben, and we're talking about leadership. More specifically, we're talking about the really important skill leaders need to develop, which is running towards conflict, running towards tension, and resolving that conflict and tension as soon as possible. So if you're someone who shies away from conflict, who tends to sweep challenges under the rug, this is a great episode for you. We're going to teach you how to run into that fire. So keep on listening. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business of Unicorns podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever wanted to peek behind the scenes of Cressy Sports Performance or Mark Fisher Fitness? Well, if you do, this is your moment, my friends. You can spend a day and a half with Pete and Mark and Ben. In fact, Ben's going to be there as well. And you, for only $149. So for $149, you get to peek behind the scenes of all three of my colleagues' businesses, which is amazing. Last year, we sold out this offering, but we're bringing it back. This is a collaboration we're doing with Perform Better, which is, the industry's leading source of functional training equipment, training information, seminars, and we're calling it the Gym Owner Masterclass. It's exclusively for gym owners looking to create more income, impact, and freedom, which is, what we're all about on this podcast. And we're going to teach you the most important lessons that we've learned in our combined 30 plus years of running our gyms. So you're going to hear directly from Ben and Mark and Pete about what they've learned running their gyms and helping hundreds of other gym owners. They're going to teach you exactly what's working right now for the top 1% of gym owners that we work with. And it's going to be a full day on Friday, May 16th and a half day on Saturday, May 17th. It's in Warwick, Rhode Island. And again, we're doing this in collaboration with Perform Better, which, are great friends and fantastic folks. You should know their webinars and their seminars because they do great work. So in the show notes down below, go click the button if you want to join us. Again, Friday, May 16th and Saturday, May 17th with Ben and Mark and Pete for only $149. It'll never be any cheaper, my friends. So go do it. And we have Ben on the podcast today. Ben, are you stoked for the Gym Owner Masterclass?
Honestly, yeah. Last time we hit the perfect combination of, I'm biased because I was one of the speakers, but like really good quality talks, but like intimate environments. I felt like I knew everybody's name and they could ask questions and we had downtime in between. Like it wasn't
great.
It was like TED Talk presentations, but you get to talk to the speaker.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's the best of both worlds when there's really great content, but you can also chat with the people giving the content to right size it for yourself and your business. It makes it so hands-on, so applicable. So everyone in the room leaves with real tangible action steps, which I love. So I love that. You're going to have so much fun. I'm going to have so much FOMO that weekend. Well, thanks for being here, Ben. How are you otherwise? How's life?
Life is great. As of recording this, we're a week and a half out from our retreat, which is always just a blast. It's always a highlight. I love it.
Yeah.
And other than that, the snow is melting. My 8 to 10 foot tall snowbanks at the side of my driveway are now down to like 4 feet, and I'm feeling great about that.
That's amazing. Yeah, the same. I was just walking my dog earlier outside, and Pippin and I were both very excited about the sunshine on our faces. We just stopped for a moment and just was staring up at the sun. And we're like, oh, finally, it's here. It's coming. Yeah. And I'm also very excited for our retreat. We're, like I said, a week and a half away from going to Toronto with all of our Unicorn Society members and a few new friends, which will be so exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Well, let's dive into today's topic. So today's topic, my friends, is about leadership. We're going to talk about leadership. And in particular, I want to talk about one specific kind of, I would call it a best practice. I'm going to call it a habit. I want to maybe even call it like an instinct that I think is really critical for most leaders. And the instinct we want to talk about today that I think is critical for all leaders is the instinct to run towards problems, to run towards issues, to run towards tension, to run into the proverbial fire, right? Just like, people who are firemen and women need to learn how to run into a burning building and overcome all of our biological processes that tell us not to do that. Same thing for leadership, but less extreme, right? We have to overcome a lot of our biological processes that tell us avoid the conflict. We have a lot of biological processes that are like, no, is it really that bad? Just sweep it under the rug. We will do anything. Our brains will do anything. Our bodies will do anything to avoid tension and conflict in many cases. And for many of you, including myself, and this has been true for Ben, we have to teach ourselves to run toward the conflict, to run toward the tension. And before I open up to you, Ben, I just want to share this one way I think about this is that part of our jobs as leaders is to build and maintain the culture of our gyms, right? The culture. And I think of culture often as like a garden, right? It's this environment that we maintain to make sure everything can grow and thrive. Even though everyone in the garden, all the plants and flowers and vegetables all need different things, our job is to maintain an ecosystem that allows them all to thrive as much as possible. And the analogy to our conversation today is like, well, part of the job is making sure that you keep the weeds out. Part of the job is making sure that the deer don't come and eat it. Part of their job is to make sure that, anything else that can ruin the environment that our plants and flowers and vegetables grow in, that part of our job is to be the bouncers of that culture to keep that stuff out. So whether it's a client or a team member or a neighbor or, our job is to bounce them out, right? I'm using mixed metaphors here now, but you get the point.
You're the garden bouncer.
The garden bouncer, right? What's wrong with that? That's clear. So yeah, that's at least the way I think about it in my head and in my heart about what my job is to kind of like maintain the culture, which means when there's issues or tension, I got to run towards that. I got to be the first one to go address it. So anyway, I just want to give that framing because that's how I think about this topic. How about you? What's your kind of overall approach to managing your culture and the tension and conflict that arises in it?
Yeah, I mean, the garden bouncer is great. I always love doing podcasts with you because I feel like I get nice little nuggets of wisdom that I can like, ooh, I can teach that to somebody now. That's great. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to add other than just like plus oneing the fact that we've now been in business for over a decade. I've been in the fitness industry for a decade and a half, like a legit 15 years training people now. So it's just like, I'm not saying I don't have experience other people have, but I have experience other people don't have. But like I've just seen enough times where I've taken the easy path of sweeping it under the rug, and the fire gets out of control, or the weeds get into the garden, or whatever. That I'm kind of just fucking tired of dealing with that.
Yeah.
And the only person I have to blame for the problems I had to deal with was my past self, and I just refuse to set my future self up for a game I'm going to lose. Yeah. Maybe the angle I'm taking is I've screwed it up enough. I'm tired of screwing it up. And now the only answer is lean in because I know what leaning out does.
Yeah. Well, listen, Ben, I think that's called wisdom, right? I think that's like a perfect example of like learning from your past self, learning from your past mistakes, being committed to doing something different next time to avoid the pain from the last decisions you made. So, I mean, that's huge. I mean, it's a perfect example of how we all learn from our own experience on a regular basis.
Thank you. If I just had a little bit of silver in my beard and a little gray in my hair, I'd look as wise as I feel, but I don't know if a backwards hat nowadays speaks wisdom.
You know what? It comes from the inside. Yeah. Well, I mean, let's just dive in. I mean, like an example. So like, thinking back, it could be a recent one or one from your past. What's an example of a time where you had to really push yourself, challenge yourself to like run toward an issue, run toward a tension, run toward a conflict? Can you think of one?
Oh my God. Yeah. There's probably literal hundreds.
Yeah.
A recent one. So my GM does sales. She does all the things at my gym. She's essentially the gym owner, but not the owner.
Yeah.
And I got a little bit complacent a few months ago with just like not asking her about like the sales stuff and not asking her about continuing education. Because in my head, I'm like, you know what? Alicia's a G, and she absolutely is.
Yep.
And I'm not just saying that because she listens to this, because I don't know if she does or not, but she's like truly awesome at what she does. I'm like, you know what? She's great. And I know she's organized. She's on it. And then we noticed that like some things started to slip. And I had the moment of like, well, she should know better. Right. Yeah. I went to blaming external things instead of looking in the mirror. Like, she should know better. What's she doing wrong? What are the fictional narratives I'm creating in my head and convincing myself of? And then I sleep on it for a night or two, and I'm like, wait, this is on me. It's my job to manage her. It's like literally my only job in my gym. And we just had like a recentering conversation where it's like, hey, when we talk about how our sales going, it's not just like, hey, our sales on track? Yeah. So your sales on
Mm-hmm.
track. Cool. Let's talk a little bit more. How's our funnel looking? We get enough leads. What's this person at for converting? What's going on with this termination? And it's two things have happened. One, our results have improved. Two, I am 10, 50, 100 times less stressed about it because now I'm basing it on fact, not the very compelling fictional narrative that I created in my head and was keeping me up at night.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's such a good example because there's really nothing wrong with what you were doing before. You were still meeting to talk about sales and talk about the outputs and all that. But you weren't, even when things weren't working, you weren't diving deep enough. And when they were working, you weren't diving deep enough. So running toward even this, that little bit of tension produces even so much better outcomes for you, which I think is such a good example of there was nothing truly on fire. There was nothing that was truly broken. But the fact that you didn't feel great about it, there was some tension there. There was yet unresolved, and you have some sleepless or less sleepful nights, right? Means like, oh, there's something to address here. What if I walk towards that? What if I get curious about that? Ask more questions, try to change up our process. And when you did, you learned a lot, got better results, and now moving forward, there's less of a gap there to keep you up at night.
Yeah. And the beauty too was like it helps. I think it helped her. You have to ask her for me to give input in some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes she's just like, "Oh my god, I get that. Move on," and it's well warranted. Because I probably said it 100 times. But there's other things where it's like, "Well, here's what I'm doing." Like, "Well, here's an idea," or "What's the actual issue of that?" Or "Here's another way you could come about it." So it ends up like the key point is I'm not as stressed about it because I'm not making up shit that's happening. It's reinforcing that she actually does have stuff, but it's also putting marbles in the trust jar and building that relationship so that when something is on potentially literal fire, like I know I've got someone at my side who's not going to buckle. And I will go to a hill I think I'm willing to die on is that for a leadership position in your gym, like trust is the most important thing. You can teach them the skills. Really hard to rebuild trust if you erode it, or to fight fires if you don't have it.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more that, the relationship you form is really critical, and no relationship thrives without trust. Right. And so I think it's a great thing to consider. And I think running towards the issues and knowing that you're not just willing to reluctantly talk about the things that aren't working, but you proactively are excited as much as one can be to talk about the things that are not working, that you want to invite conversation about things that are broken or tension filled or where there's conflict, right? And that's something that also helps build trust when the people that you lead know they can turn to you, not just when times are good, but when times are bad, when they're confused or when they fucked up or something really went wrong, right? Or there's something not working at all. They need to know that you're not only going to not yell at them and get them in trouble, right? But you welcome that, right? You want that information to flow in your direction as a leader, right? Which is another reason why having this like posture of running towards issues is so critical, right? Because the alternative is your team thinking like, oh my gosh, don't bring that to Ben. He's going to be so mad. Or like, crap, don't bring that to Ben. He's going to blame you. You're going to be in trouble, right? Or you get the idea. And like, that's the worst, right? To have a boss who you feel like you can only bring the good stuff to. Ugh, it's like, what?
Or the example you set with your leadership is that problems get swept under the rug, and then they start sweeping problems under the rug, and then you don't even know what the problems your gym is facing, and then you're real fucked.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what I want to talk about next. So I'll throw out this paradigm, and then we can maybe both give some examples along the way. So one of the things I see that's really easy for most leaders is that, and we'll picture this on a spectrum. So on the far right end of the spectrum is when there's real obvious tension and conflict in your gym that it's very easy for owners to address. And say easy, it's like it's second nature. If a client punches another client, you're going to run towards that conflict and break it up, right? I'm making it so obvious. When a team member steals cash from the drawer at the front desk, you're going to go and run towards that issue, right? These are like the obvious things, right? When a client when a team member tells off one of your clients and tells them to go F themselves, you're going to run in and fix that problem and make that stop, right? These are like the obvious ones. I can go on and on with a million examples, which sound hilarious, but these are all things that have actually happened and then some in my life. That's almost easier. Is it fun to deal with those things? No, but it's really obvious this is something that's wrong, that is something unacceptable that we cannot allow to happen. Not even once, it's not okay. The hard stuff for leadership is when you start to move left on the spectrum. And on the far end, I'll go to the far, far end on the left, is things like, actually, your example from a few minutes ago was a perfect example of like, I just don't feel great about our sales funnel right now, and I don't know why. Right? It's that employee is such a good employee, but like, I'm not impressed by them. They don't wow me. Right? Or that client is just like, like they're fine. They pay on time. They've been coming for years, but they do kind of annoy like most people in the session with them. Right? It's this kind of friction, this kind of light friction, right? This kind of like not yet conflict. That's the stuff I think that's harder for leaders to run towards. That's the stuff that's easier to sweep under the rug because we can always, what's the way I want to say for myself? Justify to ourselves that, oh, it's not that big of a deal yet.
Yeah.
Or no one's really complaining. Who's really getting hurt? But the reality is that the more you learn to run towards those situations, and we can think of some other examples, the less likely you ever are to have bigger ones, right? Those are the things that escalate. Right? Before that client punches that other client and tells them off, right? They've had many days of just slightly annoying each other, right? Right? Before that team member, right, like goes off on their colleague, they've had many days of just like, being passive aggressive with each other, right? So the more you can learn to read and observe like the nuance of that kind of low level friction, the more likely you can intervene early and almost never deal with the higher level stuff. The higher level stuff doesn't usually come out of nowhere, right? The person who's stealing money is also probably cheating and taking shortcuts in other ways, right? The person who, you know what I'm saying? And so I think, that's the thing that I find the hardest is justifying to yourself that you're going to have that conversation about something that doesn't feel that big yet, but you should have it anyway.
Hey there, Business for Unicorns podcast listeners. If you haven't had a chance yet to leave us a rating and a review on wherever platform you listen to this podcast, it would be so awesome if you take just a quick second to do that. And here's why. Number one, by leaving us a rating and review, you'll allow our podcast audience to grow so more gym owners can build a life and a gym they love. And number two, by leaving us feedback, you'll help us shape the future of the podcast so we know what you like, we know what you don't like, and we know what types of content is resonating and what else should we create for you. Thank you so much for your consideration. And now back to the show.
Have it anyway. Yeah. Can you think of any examples down at that end of the spectrum?
Yeah. An example of like, it's like if somebody is like not late on something, and I don't mean like punctuality specifically, but maybe late on deliverables, late on programs, late on deadlines, but it's like inconsistently late.
Yes.
You justify it to yourself that like, well, they're usually getting their stuff done, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Yep.
Like that's a really good example of like it. But I'm sure we're going to get to this, but what it is doing is actually eroding trust.
Yeah.
You went from Michael gets all this shit done on time and I have a complete trust in him to like, Michael normally gets all his stuff on time, but like, should I check in with him? But is he going to think I'm micromanaging? Do I even address this? Because he knocked it out of the park with that client the other day. Like, ugh.
Yep. Yeah, it's that gray area where you're like, I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but this does bother me. I do spend time thinking about it, worrying about it, frustrated about it. And I'm here on this podcast to say, yes, go talk about it, right? If you're spending any time thinking about it, worrying about it, strategizing about it, unhappy with it in any way, I think it's worth talking about. Whether or not you take drastic action, I'm not suggesting that someone who's like a little late from time to time on their deadlines, like the first step isn't to fire them. The first step might have not even be to write them up. The first step might be like, you know what, sometimes I just get concerned you're not going to get stuff done because you have like a spotty track record. How do we get you to get stuff in time more often? Let's just talk about how we can do that together. Right. And that's go ahead.
To steal from your bouncer analogy, like there's a reason the bouncers don't let people with knives into the bar.
Sure.
They don't wait till the person gets stabbed. They saw the red flag and they addressed it. I realize our gyms aren't, or they don't. You don't only pull the weeds from your garden once it's overgrown and your tomatoes are dying. Like I know those are a little more cut and dry examples, but it's like you nip it in the bud. Yeah, and it's a really easy conversation once you have a few of them.
Yeah, and it's easier also when it's that small. Right. That's a friendly conversation. That's like a gentle nudge. That's a collaborative conversation when it comes to talking to your clients or your teammates. You're working together to help get in front of something that's not that big a deal yet. It's a much harder conversation as you move down the spectrum. Once this is someone who's been repeatedly late and always misses deadlines and the whole team has been frustrated with them for 3 months, that's harder. Right. Once they get to the place where they've been passive aggressive and they've been written up multiple times, that's harder. right? I mean, so I say all this to say, let's get in front of these conversations and let's maybe spend maybe a few more minutes left here. I want to talk a little bit about, I'm sure we covered this topic before on the podcast, but I'll talk a little bit about how do you prepare for those conversations? And I know we've covered a model recently in our coach training at Business of Unicorns. Maybe we can use that. But I want to just give you all some tips for if you buy into this idea that Ben and I are pitching, that you should run towards conflict, run towards issues early and often to nip them in the bud before they grow. How do you do that? How do you prepare for those conversations? Ben, do you want to share what kind of the SBI model that we've talked about before, or I can kick it off if you want?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. You want me to give a quick overview of what SBI is?
Yeah, go for it.
So SBI stands for Situation, Behavior, Impact, Intent. Mm-hmm. Situation, behavior, impact, intent. And we're going to unpack that a little bit more, but this gives you steps to go through while you're having this conversation. So you're not just like, I didn't like that you've been late a few times. Well, that sounds like a personal attack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we use this model, which is very, very popular model, comes out of some leadership research. And the idea is that you use this model to prepare for conversations like this. And the situation stands for what's the context in which you see this behavior. So let's just use an employee who is often late turns things in late, right? A simple example, right? I'll say, okay, I would start off by thinking, okay, what are the moments where I'm seeing, let's call him Scott. What's the moments where I'm seeing Scott turn in things late? Like, what are the actual contexts for that? Is it monthly reports? Is it when we're doing continuing education? Is it a little bit of everything? Do I have some examples I can point to? And then when it get clear, but what's the context in which this is happening? Then we move on to the behavior, which is what exactly do I see and hear happening, right? So in this case, I see you actually email me 1 week after the deadline to turn something in, or I see you, sending in this thing only after I email and text you 3 times, right? This is the exact behavior. And the important thing here is when you think about describing the behavior to them, you want to do it without judgment. So so what I'm not saying is the behavior is Scott's just being a lazy jerk. Right. The behavior isn't that Scott just can't get his shit together, right? Those are all like extremely judgmental ways of me talking about the behavior that I see and hear, which is I see you turning in things 1 week after the deadline, after I've reminded you a few times, right? There's no judgment in that. I'm mad about it, but there's no judgment in that.
Yeah. And the point that I've taken from probably you on this is one of the ways to come across as not judging is to use I statements. Mm-hmm. I noticed this was late, not you were late, bitch. Even if you don't say the bitch part, that's still what they hear. Like, I noticed that thing was submitted a week late.
Exactly.
It's about you and what you experience, not your judgment of their action.
It's much different to say, I've really noticed the last few deadlines, you've turned them in late. This one was 3 weeks late. This one was 1 week late. And I've noticed that you only really respond because I've nudged you a few times. That's different than saying, Ben, you always turn in shit late. You're always making me follow up with you. It seems accusatory. It seems blaming. And just that small tweak in language makes a big difference to having a conversation that is productive instead of combative, right? And so I think, okay, where we are. S, situation. What is the context? B, behavior. Impact is being ready to share with them the impact, usually negative impact, of their behavior. So, in the case of Scott, what are some impacts of that behavior, Ben?
Yeah, it could be that it's eroding trust, like I mentioned before. Yeah. It could be that it's leading to you getting frustrated. It could lead to team members being frustrated. I mean, we're making up this fake deadline. I don't know what the exact impact would be. Yeah. There might be clients who are a little bit unhappy. Someone mentioned that their program was a couple days late, a couple months in a row.
Yeah.
But it's really about sharing what's going on with you as the manager of what's the impact of them doing it. It's not just the thing was late. It doesn't matter. Why does it matter?
Yeah, exactly. So sharing the impact is sharing that there are consequences to this behavior that we're talking about. There are negative consequences to behavior. Negative consequences because of me as your manager, negative consequences to you as someone who wants to grow in this career, negative consequences to maybe colleagues for XYZ reasons, team members. And so you get the idea. I think sharing the impact of their behavior is really critical to having there be some consequence. And here's the thing. Is almost no one you talk to is doing that behavior because they want those negative impacts. Scott is not turning shit in late because he wants to annoy you. He wants to piss off his colleagues. He wants to disappoint clients. And so this should be disappointing to them. Sharing the impact, the negative impact of their behaviors should make them go, oh, crap, that's not what I want. That's not, and which is useful. You want them to have a negative reaction to impacting other people in a negative way, right? Unless you hired, a sociopath, which will happen from time to time, they should care about the fact that their behaviors are making other people unhappy. They should care about that, and then we get to the last I, which is, go
one
ahead.
other quick thing on impact, because you mentioned this to me offhand, but it was important. The only way they're probably going to know the real impact is by you sharing it with them.
Yeah.
They probably aren't aware that it's eroding trust. They might not know that other team members are frustrated. They might not even know that client's frustrated, especially if the client came to you instead of telling them.
Yeah.
The only way for them to actually get the gravity of the situation is for you to tell them the gravity of the situation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And sometimes just knowing that is enough to change some people's behaviors. And sometimes not, but I think that's a good place to start, right? So we got the situation, we got the behavior, the impact. There's one other hidden I here. It's kind of SBII. And the other I is intent. So at this point in the conversation, what you want to prepare for is how do you get curious about what's going on with them? How do you get curious about what their intention is? So I might say to Scott, like, hey, here's the situation, here's the behavior, here's the impact. And Scott, what's going on for you in those moments? When you find yourself turning things in late, right? Like, what's going on there? Tell me, what's your workload? What's driving that decision to turn things in late? What's getting in your way? So I want to get clear about what's Scott's intention here, right? I mean, in some cases, you'll learn that they're not really clear about their intention. There's some other thing going on in their life. Maybe Scott's prioritizing taking care of a loved one at home, or Scott's prioritizing their own mental health, or Scott just doesn't have the skills to be able to manage their time and their to-do list in the way that he wants to, right? But your job here in this point in the conversation is to get curious about what's going on with you. What do you see going on when this behavior is displayed on a regular basis? And hopefully within your sharing and within them sharing what's going on with them, you start to uncover some ways to untangle this mess, right? To find some new behaviors they can try, some new boundaries you might need to set. But I think that often that last piece of getting curious about their intent starts to reveal some possible paths forward. What would you add to that, Ben?
Well, the flip side of the coin is the only way they're going to know the impact is by you telling them. The only way you're going to know their intent is by asking them. And as Michael said, that's about getting curious with open-ended questions. It's not just like, don't be late next time. That might be an accountability step you get to a version of later down the road, depending the impact of this. But you don't know what they're intending. And I can't think of a single example where somebody's intent was actually to piss me off or frustrate me or to all this shit in my head where I'm like, fucking Scott with the It's never that. They're like,
no,
it's like a basic skill thing, or they don't have a good system for to-dos, or they're overwhelmed with stuff at home, or it ends up being this beautiful recalibration conversation because they know what's at stake for you and you know what's going on with them, so you give them the appropriate help.
Yeah. It's really, at the end of the day, this exercise, which is true for almost all feedback conversations, it's a real exercise in empathy, right? What we're trying to do in a feedback conversation like this is let me tell you what it's like to be in my shoes as your manager and what I see for me, what the impact is on me, our clients, the rest of our team. And I also want to learn what it's like to be in your shoes. What's going on for you that make you continuously display this behavior, right? So you're really trying to put yourself in each other's shoes to find some sort of common ground for moving forward. And listen, it may not always be possible, right? There are some cases where people just don't have the self-awareness to be able to self-correct their own behavior. And they might not even have the interest or motivation in changing the way they behave. And those are people, hopefully, if you find that out very clearly, you just learn to manage out of your organization. If people are not willing to learn and grow and change and challenge themselves, those are often people you don't want to work with. Right? I don't say that lightly, but that's just the truth. If someone's not willing to look at their own behavior, see it's making a negative impact on others, and try something new, then you don't belong on my team, right? I wouldn't wish that on anyone's team, right? And so I think at some point the rubber might meet the ground. Rubber might meet the road. Yeah. And you might need to have, and then pivot to a disciplinary process and pivot to writing them up or creating a performance improvement plan. And no, that's not fun. No one ever wants to get there, which is why you got to have this kind of feedback conversation way early when the problem just starts to peak up above the horizon.
Yeah, and well, what you're describing there, whether it is a nice, beautiful outcome where they lean in and change their behavior, or it's the beginning of a performance improvement plan,
Yeah.
in either case, you leave with clarity,
Yeah.
and you both actually leave with clarity. Is probably even more important. They know that that behavior is not okay, and there's consequences for it, and you know what's going on with them, and know what the next step is, rather than being like, "Shit, I hope Scott's not late again," and "Oh, damn, I hope it's not on that important thing that we actually need." Don't waste your mental
100%.
bandwidth on that. You got way better things to do. Just have this conversation. I know it's
Yeah.
not that simple, but it
Yeah.
kind of is.
100%. Yeah, I think it's a good place to honestly leave this conversation. I think we can keep going, but this is already a long podcast for us. Look at us. We got a lot to talk about on this topic. But I think it's a good place to leave it, which is your job, as we said multiple times here, is to run toward these issues, run towards these conflicts. And the sooner you can address them, the more likely you are to find, a happy resolution before things get too insane or out of control or escalate too much. And that's part of your job as leader, is to just, to run into the fire, even when it's small, just run into the sparks, right? And make sure you can get in front of these issues before they really blow up. And when you do, you'll be able to maintain a great culture for hopefully many, many years for you and your team and your clients. Yeah. Any parting words for our listeners, Ben?
You nailed it. Bullseye. Nothing to add.
Nailed it. Great. A+ for me. Awesome. Well, friends, thanks for listening. And again, if you want to join Mark and Ben and Pete on Friday, May 16th and Saturday, May 17th in Warwick, Rhode Island, go click the link down below in the show notes and join our gym owner masterclass. It's going to be so fun. And for only $149, you'll never get time with these dudes for less money. Thanks for the great conversation, Ben. I'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.